Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Sheviit. We're up to our final Mishnah in the Masechet, Perek Yud Mishnah Tet. Today's Mishnah should be Le'nushmat, Neria ben Svedlana, Aaron Baev, Menuchato Began Eden, Amen, and Navdil ben Chaim Lechaim for the Refuah Shlema of Yonatan ben Abraham, B'toch Shar Cholei Israel. The Mishnah says in Mishnah Tet, Hamachazir Chov B'Shviit Ruach Chachamim Nocha Himenu. If someone repays a debt, even though it was canceled by the Shemitah, the Chachamim are pleased with them. Meaning, even though loans are legally canceled, the Chachamim, the sages, encourage people to go beyond the letter of the law and repay all debts. Now, the Mishnah mentions two more cases where the Chachamim want people to go beyond the letter of the law. The first is regarding a convert. If someone borrows from a convert whose children that were born to him as a non-Jew converted together with him. So he was a non-Jew, he had non-Jewish children, and then they all converted together. And he borrowed money from this convert. The borrower does not have to return the money to the convert's children, meaning, we know in halakha, ger kinolad dami, when a person converts to Judaism, he is considered like a newborn child. Therefore, even if members of his family converted with him, they are not legally considered his heirs, and therefore the borrower does not have to pay the sons for the loan that was owed to their father. The Mifarshim explained that this halakha applies only to children born before the lender converted. Any children born to the convert from a Jewish woman after he converted are legally his heirs, and loans made by the convert must be repaid to them. Here we're talking about when he had the children while he was a non-Jew and they converted together. The Mishnah says, the borrower does not have to return the money to the convert's children. However, if the borrower returns the loan to the children, the Chachamim are pleased with him for doing so. And the final case of the Mishnah, all movable objects are acquired by drawing them near oneself, meaning moving the object into one's possession. That's known as mishicha. Now, we know some movable objects can be acquired with other methods of physically taking possession, like lifting the object or handing it over. The reason the Mishnah specifically said mishicha, which is moving it into your possession, is because that's the method that's more used for most items. Now, in order to acquire a movable object, we know it's not enough to pay for it. It does not become the buyer's property until he physically takes hold of it. He performs mishicha. Until then, either party can back out of the sale. However, whoever keeps his word and does not back out of a sale agreement, even if the buyer did not perform mishicha, he didn't yet take hold of the object, the Chachamim are pleased with his actions. And on top of that, once a person verbally agrees to buy or sell something, the Chachamim recommend that he does not back out of the deal, even though he has the legal right to do so. On top of that, if the buyer has already paid for the object, even though technically the deal is not complete until he physically takes hold of the item and legally acquires it, the Chachamim pronounced a curse on someone who backs out of a sale after the money has been paid. The Chachamim they frown upon such activities, but even if the money wasn't paid, if you don't back out of the sale, even though there was no kinyan and no money done yet, no given over yet, whoever keeps his word, the ruach of the chachamim, the spirit of the sages, it is pleased with him. And that is in Rabotai of Masechet Sheviit, Salik Masechet Sheviit, Hadran Alach Masechet Sheviit. We should come back to Masechet Sheviit. Chazak u'Baruch and Mazal Tov. We move on in our Mishnayot in Seder Zreim to the Mishnayot of Masechet Terumot. Now, we spoke about it a little bit when we learned Demai. The Torah commands that several portions have to be separated from produce that grew in Eretz Yisrael. There's really four main tithes. We have Terumah Gedolah, which is when you first harvest and process the produce, the owner of the produce has to separate this portion, which is usually called Terumah, and give it to a Kohen. We're going to define the amount later. Then you have Maaser Rishon, which is the owner then separates 1/10 of what remains and gives it to a Levi. Then we have Terumat Maaser. After receiving the Maaser Rishon, the Levi separates 1/10 of it and gives it to the Kohen. And then we have either Maaser Sheni or Maaser Ani, depending on the year. After separating Terumah Gedolah and Maaser Rishon, the owner of the produce then separates an additional 1/10 of what remains. This 1/10 becomes either Maaser Sheni or Maaser Ani, depending on the year in which the produce grows. Out of a 7-year cycle, in the first, second, fourth, and fifth year of the 7-year Shemitah cycle, This tenth is considered Maaser Sheni. It has to be brought to Yerushalayim and eaten there. If a person finds it hard to take his produce to Yerushalayim and eat it there, he redeems it by transferring its sanctity onto coins. He brings the coins to Yerushalayim, buys food with them there. The sanctity of the coins therefore is transferred back to the food, which becomes subject to the laws of Maaser Sheni and eats in Yerushalayim. In the 3rd and 6th year of the Shemitah cycle, this tenth is Maaser Ani, Maaser for the poor, which is given to the poor. Produce that grows in the 7th year of Shemitah is exempt from all Terumot and Maasrot, because the Torah commands that such produce is ownerless. Now, as long as any of the required Terumot and Maasrot have not yet been separated, the produce is tevel, which is a contraction of the words tavlo, unfit to eat. Eating tevel is asur. Once the Terumot and Maasrot have been separated, the remainder is called chulin. This Masechah will primarily deal with the laws of Terumah Gedolah. Many of the laws apply to Terumat Maaser, and some apply to Maasrot as well. We will go at length in the Masechet Bezrat Hashem. Just to point out, according to biblical law from the Torah, the prohibition against eating tevel doesn't go into effect until the produce has been fully processed and has been brought into the house. The Chachamim, however, forbade eating untithed produce in a formal way as opposed to a snack. As soon as the produce becomes edible, again, we will discuss it more in this Masechet and in the next Masechet, Masechet Maasrot. I advise, as a general introduction, to read the art scroll elucidated in the general introduction. It'll give you a brief overview about what exactly Terumah is. But anyways, Perek Aleph, Mishnah Aleph of Mishnayot Terumot. The Mishnah now will list people who are not legally able to separate Terumah from Tevel. Even though the Mishnah of this chapter are going to speak about Terumah, the same halacha applies to Maasrot. Chamisha lo yitromu, the following 5 people may not separate Terumah. V'im tarmu and terumatan terumah. And if they did try to separate terumah, the terumah is not a valid separation, meaning the portion they designated did not become terumah, and therefore you have to separate terumah again from that produce. Number 1, hacheresh. Even though cheresh means a mute, in halacha, in this Mishnah, it means a deaf mute, someone who cannot hear and he cannot speak. Vashoteh, an insane person, which the Mefarshim explain, a person is considered insane if he regularly destroys things that are given to him. The katan, a minor. Now we know halachically a child is a minor until he's 13 for a boy, or for a girl 12, and has grown 2 pubic hairs for the boy. The katan, and Rabbi said, and a minor, someone who separates terumah from produce that is not his without the owner's permission, that's invalid, because we know terumah must be separated by the owner of the produce. If anyone else separated terumah for him, the terumah is invalid, unless if the owner asks someone to separate terumah for him, or he gives him permission to do so, the other person becomes the shliach, the legal agent, and he can separate terumah on behalf of the owner. This works because of the rule shlucho shel adam kmoto. The agent of a person is like himself, meaning the actions of an agent are considered as if they were done by the person who appointed him. Speaks about this more in Masechet Kiddushin, page 41b. And the final ineligible person, Oved Kochavim Shetaram et Shel Yisrael Afilu Birshut En Terumato Terumah, an idolater who separated terumah from the produce of a Jew, even if he acted with the owner's permission, his terumah is not terumah, because the Rav tells us only a Jew can become the legal agent of another Jew, an idolater cannot. And the Mishnah learns these halachot out from the Psukim in Sefer Shemot, chapter 25, Psukim 2-3. The Pasuk says, Daber l'bnei Yisrael, speak to the children of Israel, v'yikchu li terumah, and let them take terumah from you, which literally means donation. Me'et kuli she'yidivenu libo, from every man whose mind motivates him, tikchu et terumati, you shall take my terumah. V'zod et terumah she'tikchu meitam, this is the terumah that you shall take from them. From the fact that the words say, Daber el bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, that excludes an idolater. From the fact that it says, Me'et kol ish, from every man, that excludes a minor. From the fact that it says the words whose mind motivates him, it says Me'et kol ish divenu libo, that excludes a deaf mute and an insane person who are legally defined as lacking mindfulness. And the words from them, me'itam, that excludes someone who separates terumah from produce, that it is not his own. Now, although we know the Psukim are literally speaking of donations made toward the building of the Mishkan, which was the portable temple that the Jews used when they traveled in the wilderness, since the word is written as terumah, the laws it teaches are also applied to the terumah of produce as well. Based off the Rambam's commentary in the Mishnayot, that is done about today's Mishna Yomi. Again, Mazal Tov on finishing Masechet Sheviit, and we begin our journey in Masechet Terumot. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen v'Amen.